Station. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, one of Donald Trump's top officials is reportedly leaving the White House. Mike Waltz, his national security advisor, mistakenly added a journalist to a group chat used to discuss classified information. At the time, President Trump said Waltz was a good man who'd made a mistake. And only yesterday, Mike Waltz was praising Donald Trump during a cabinet meeting.
Pulling this great team together, Mr. President, everything from revitalizing shipyards to cyber to space, that takes this entire team working together. It's an honor to serve you in this administration.
Volodymyr Zelensky says a deal giving the US access to Ukraine's minerals resource is a truly equal agreement. Earlier, the White House said it gives America a stake in securing a peaceful future for Ukraine. Netball is the latest sport to ban transgender women from competing. England Netball has followed the Football Association in updating its policy after the UK Supreme Court ruled women are defined by biological sex. And Marks & Spencer has had to freeze recruitment following a cyber attack over Easter weekend. The company has been struggling with contactless payments in click and collect orders since then as well. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 1 point at 84.96. The pound buys $1.32 and €1.17. LBC weather, a cool night in the north with some isolated showers in the far northwest. Largely dry in southern areas, a low of 4 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Carefully, watch carefully, listen carefully, and week by week we see the whole world changing. In just the past few days, we've had news of a sudden dip in the American economy, of Canada's defiant general election, all while the US president accuses Putin of tapping him along. And now today, Ukraine has signed a deal with the US it regards as fair and which gives it a new security tripwire. In Washington, it's become ever clearer that Elon Musk, who just a few weeks ago seemed to be one of the most powerful political figures in the world, is right now being edged out. This afternoon, we got reports that Mike Waltz, Trump's national security advisor responsible for the leak of secret conversations in a group chat, has been fired. Now, sure, just individual stories, but put them together, and are we not seeing a week when the great tidal force that is Donald Trump began to smash into the rocks of the realities that surround him? Canada, not the 51st state, but still there as independent as ever. Ukraine, well, surprisingly hard it turns out to effectively bully, and although there is still a very long way to go, still in the fight. Meanwhile, in the court of King Donald, it turns out that even the biggest chest-beating barons are, like everybody else, politically mortal. It's one of the oddities of political journalism that if you repeatedly predict catastrophe and you are repeatedly proved wrong, you are still generally thought to be wise and worth listening to. But if you imply that things might actually be getting a little better, you're dismissed as pathetically naive. Well, on this gloriously warm Thursday evening, I have decided I don't care. I look around and feel little flashes of mild optimism. Reasons to be cheerful. To talk about this, perhaps to persuade me I'm wrong, I need the very shrewdest and most experienced people around. Tonight, we're joined by the former Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Kasyanov, the Oxford Professor of Global History and author of The Silk Roads, Peter Frankopan, and the Canadian High Commissioner Ralph Goodale. Peter, let's start with you. Lots of different stories there, but the sense that Trump is running into reality on all sides seems to me to be part of the narrative of the last few days. What do you think?
Well, I think we've seen that all coming. I mean, I don't think anything takes seasoned observers like you, Andrew, by surprise. I mean, this was all messaged when Trump was on the campaign trail. I think what all of us have been waiting for is for the bottom of the boat to start hitting the rocks and scraping along and just see what kinds of action, corrective action takes place. So, I mean, amongst the things today, like you mentioned, Mike Waltz been given the boot and a Ukraine deal. So, you know, the White House is in need of good news, and it's in need of good news to show and prove that Donald Trump is the real deal. And, we've seen amongst the things we've seen are terrible polling numbers because people in America are realizing that it turns out that tariffs don't bring down the price of goods. And, we've got at the moment all sorts of pressures that are coming towards the US economy that's going to make life harder and harder for Trump, just regardless of what happens internationally and globally.
So reality bites, in short. I'd be very interested in your view about the Ukraine deal in particular, because I've always thought that putting American workers and American money onto the front line in Ukraine to get out minerals was a very important tripwire, which would cause a lot of problems for Putin. But at the same time, the Americans seem to have taken off the table the idea the Ukrainians should actually pay back the money that they got in the first place.
I mean, look, the deal looks like, we've only seen a few pages. The deal looks like it does three things. First, it gives Donald Trump what looks like a win, that there is a deal that he's been promising. And that has political capital in the United States. I don't think it matters a huge amount anywhere else. Second, that deal doesn't give Ukraine any security guarantees whatsoever. It's true that American money might flow in and American contractors might deploy to Ukraine to extract minerals. But those kinds of operations take many years to establish. To give it some kind of context, Ukraine last year exported about $1 billion of critical minerals, which is more or less nothing in the grand scheme of things. Third, the reason I think that's important for Trump to have accelerated and pushed on this deal is not just about the window dressing, it's that China has reacted to the global tariffs by blocking the export of critical minerals that the United States needs for its advanced industries, technologies, and particularly for its military. And so Ukraine looks like a potential source or an alternative source, but that's going to take years to exploit. And Trump, like all politicians that Andrew, they're not here forever. So, in 3 years' time, 280 weeks' time, Trump is gone. But announcing things looks better than the reality.
Yeah, I just feel a slight chill breeze of political mortality at the moment. Maybe that's putting it too strongly. But you and I were probably both brought up as free traders in that sense, and we might not be surprised by the impact of the tariffs. But if it turns out that tariffs are bringing higher prices and inflation and low growth to America, there's not that long until the midterm elections, and that will presumably be the biggest aspect of reality hitting Trump of all.
Look, I think the single biggest problem with Trump, and it was the same in the first presidency, in the worlds I work on in Asia, in the Gulf, in South India, in South Asia, in China, is not that Trump imposes tariffs or wants to create commercial settlements. That's fine. It's he changes his mind all the time. And even with the tariffs, we've seen pushback, we've seen changes, we've had threats, things that have been imposed and haven't been imposed. And because Trump blows in the wind, it's very difficult to prepare. And that's hard at state level. That's also hard if you're Apple. Do you take the cost of redeploying and pushing your factories into India, which also has very high tariffs for US businesses and might come next on Trump's menu? So I think it's planning ahead. And because Trump changes his opinions all the time, being a destabilizer can provide advantage. But oftentimes what we're seeing is the degradation of the United States as a reliable friend. And we've seen that here in Europe, and we've seen that lots of different arenas, but lots of people around the world, I think, are working out, is there an alternative where we don't just have to rely on the US?
Well, we're going to hear in a moment from the Canadian High Commissioner, but on that specific point, the Canadian Prime Minister re-elected Mark Carney has said that America has kind of lost its role as the economic leader of the free world. Do you see, with your experience, the possibility of a new alliance of non-American Western powers beginning to take over, possibly as early as the G7, some kind of leadership role?
I mean, we've seen Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU Commission, saying that the West is dead. And I think that what happens around the world is there are lots of different forums for groups of countries to try to cooperate together. BRICS is one of those that's expanded now to include places like Indonesia, Egypt, etc., Ethiopia, that now covers about 50% of the world's population.
And we should explain to people, that's really the Chinese-led one.
Well, it is. Everyone has a different view. It's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are the original members. But that's a world order that is exploring, can there be an OPEC for metals? Can there be a cereals exchange that excludes the West? Is there a way in which these countries can work together? And the honest answer is there are now 10 members of this bloc. But there are lots of different opinions about how dominant China could or should or might be, or Russia and others. Lots of them don't see eye to eye. But the fact that there are these feel-arounds to try to work out, are there ways in which the the world doesn't have to worry about the world's biggest superpower, militarily, economically, the United States? Are there ways in which new forms and new blocks can be created? I think here in Europe, we're involved in some of those questions too, with the Commonwealth, with Europe, with the trade deals we're trying to do. It's what does the world look like where the United States is not just an erratic power, but as Martin Wolf has said in the Financial Times, what if the United States is the enemy of the West? And that, for a Cold War person brought up in the Cold War like you and me, that's a complete world turned on its head. You know, we've seen in the United Nations, not just the United States vote not alongside Europe, it's voted alongside Russia in votes about condemning Ukraine. It's sort of, you can't believe it.
It's all completely disconcerting and upending. Peter Frankopan, thank you very, very much indeed for helping us out today. And now let's hear from the Canadian ambassador to the UK, Ralph Goodale. What message did he think the Canadian public was sending to Trump with last week's election result?
Well, it's very clear that Canadians are strongly united around our sovereignty, our independence as a nation, and the protection of our economy. All of the political parties during the election campaign, even including the more sovereignist party in Quebec, was very solidly pro-Canada when it came to standing up for ourselves, defending our sovereignty, defending our economy, defending our culture and our identity. There is just no doubt among Canadians on that point. And I, quite frankly, in 35 years of active involvement in Canadian politics, can't remember a time when Canadians have been quite so strongly cohesive around a core message, and that was reflected in the vote on Monday.
It was one of your former leaders, I think, who famously said that being Canada was like being in bed with an elephant. Do you think for the time being the elephant has been pushed back to its side of the bed?
Well, we have a very large neighbor right next to us in North America, and whenever that neighbor has a twitch, we feel it in very large measure. But I think the point is made in the election that Canadians want their government to stand its ground. That they're not in a mood to be intimidated. They will obviously be anxious to see what this next set of negotiations produces. But Canadians have said really unequivocally, our sovereignty is not for sale.
Yeah.
We're good neighbors, but we don't want to become our neighbors. We stand on our own.
And Mark Carney was very outspoken about the sort of existential threat to Canada being posed by what Donald Trump was saying. Very outspoken indeed. He now, I guess, has to sort of get on with Donald Trump. How do you see that relationship playing out?
Well, we'll see. They are both successful business people. Mr. Carney has exceptional business experience as well as governmental experience, and obviously he was also the governor of two central banks, as well as being a senior official in the Federal Department of Finance. So I think they can probably communicate in a language that they will both very clearly understand. They've had a couple of telephone conversations, and the readouts from those conversations have tended to be constructive, not in any great amount of detail yet. Obviously, that awaits the time when they're in the room together and across the table from one another. But hopefully, this will lead to something productive. Mr. Carney has been very clear that the kind of relationship that we have been used to over the last 80 years or more in terms of security and in terms of the economy, that kind of relationship is over. And now we're shaping a new relationship that will be different. He's added the point that it's a tragedy that bond has been broken. But he's made the point that Canada is not to be pushed around. We have tools to use and powers to exercise. And we will do that in the best interests of a sovereign Canada.
Well, indeed, next month in Kananaskis in Alberta, we're going to see the G7. Now, we don't know whether Donald Trump will attend that, but I assume he's very welcome to. But I was very struck. We've heard the words of Mark Carney. You were referring to them. He said in Edmonton, America's leadership of the global economy is over. And it was a tragedy. Now, if that's the case, does Canada see, as it were, a new joint leadership beginning to emerge, perhaps with Australia, perhaps with the EU alongside?
Well, Mr. Carney has been in touch with a number of his counterparts. The obvious connections are the Five Eyes countries, the UK and Australia and New Zealand, the G7 countries that will be gathering in Kananaskis in Canada in the middle of June. Presumably, Mr. Trump will be there, but there will be also 6 other very good allies, together with the EU, that will have important things to discuss. So Mr. Carney's made the point: if the United States is going to take an isolationist kind of approach, then there will be others emerge to lead, and Canada will be very vigorously doing its part. That's one of his critical points in addressing this situation with the United States. It's partly getting the message across about how much damage this is doing to the United States itself, both in terms of its economy and its international credibility. Secondly, it's a series of retaliation measures, not willy-nilly, but carefully calibrated to have more impact in the U.S. and less impact in Canada, so that the Americans not only hear about the wrong-headedness of their position, but they actually feel the impact of that. There will be a series of measures to support Canadian business and workers to help them defend themselves. But the critical element of our approach is to build out the Canadian economy, to get rid of those internal trade barriers. Canada between provinces, to improve the regulatory system, to invest more in science, technology, and innovation, and to diversify our markets around the world, including in all of those other countries that we've just mentioned.
Well, picking up on that directly, Mr. Goodale, does that mean that Canada is going to have a stronger relationship going forward after all of this with the European countries, with UK and with the EU?
I believe so. Mr. Carney was here just quite literally hours after he had been elected leader in the UK and in France, meeting with Mr. Starmer and President Macron. They've got some important things to discuss, in which we are all serious players. One is the geopolitical situation in the world, including making sure that Ukraine is properly defended and protected for the long term into the future, and how we cope with a world economy that is in a huge state of disruption right now, and how we build the security and intelligence alliances with one another. We've got the Five Eyes, and we're going to work very hard to make the Five Eyes work, but we may need some new architecture and some new participants in that process if the role of the United States is about to change in some way. So there's a very big agenda for leaders like Carney, Starmer, Macron, von der Leyen, and others to discuss. Very important topics for the future of the world.
Absolutely fascinating. The world is changing shape in front of our eyes. High Commissioner, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC.
Very nice to talk to you, Andrew.
Up next, as promised, we'll be hearing from a former Russian Prime Minister to find out how Putin's going to react to Washington's mineral deal with Ukraine. But the time now, 6:19.
LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on Global Player. This is LBC.
It's 6:21, and now to discuss the minerals deal reached between the United States and Ukraine last night, let's speak to Mikhail Kasyanov, former Prime Minister of Russia, who was added to a list of foreign agents and has been living in exile in Latvia after speaking out against President Putin. Mr. Kasyanov, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC tonight. First of all, I'd be very interested in how you think the Kremlin is going to react to this new deal between Trump and Ukraine, because the first indications are that it's really irritating the Kremlin. Mr. Medvedev has been very, very rude about it overnight, which suggests that it might have some significance, after all, for Ukraine in terms of its defense.
Yeah, that is very successful achievement of President Zelensky after his meeting in the Vatican. Of course, that is the event is turning just the whole situation around. And in fact, in Kremlin, I see in Kremlin, they're simply just confused. They don't want to irritate Trump. They don't want to make him angry, but they keep silence. But in fact, for them, it's unexpected thing. Just they don't know how to react. Of course, they will continue this offensive. Maybe they will not have this deadly attacks with the massive civilian casualties, but they don't change their behavior at the moment.
And we've seen the first military aid under Trump beginning to come to Kiev. Quite small at the moment, but nonetheless quite significant politically. Do you think there's a sense perhaps in Russia that that moment for some kind of peace deal is slipping away?
I think they continue to believe that despite of this new undesirable transaction which happened with Ukraine, just they continue to believe that they can make just some transactions with Trump. Directly, just their efforts just failed now, but they still believe they can make something just with the Rosneft in Arctic or in the East, something like that. But they continue to think that some kind of agreement could be reached with Trump. They believe he should be interested in good relations with Russia.
I've been talking to a couple of people from the Trump administration over the past few days who have said to me that they think that the economic pressure on Putin is underestimated. In other words, that particularly when the oil price falls, as it will, they hope, the Kremlin cannot carry on the same kind of expenditure of people, but also of money that it's doing at the moment for very much longer. And that there may be, I'm putting it quickly, if Ukraine can get through this year, then Ukraine can actually survive quite successfully.
Yeah, I'm sure that Ukraine will survive, definitely. And in fact, just this decision of President Trump that to continue supplies of military equipment and ability to purchase equipment, even by Great Britain, by other European countries, and pass it on to Ukraine. And in fact, just the Australia made a decision long ago just to pass just this 40, I think, Patriots to Ukraine was blocked because just there was no permission of the United States for re-export. Now, just I think they will get it, and in fact, that would just boosting the whole situation and the battlefield. Ukraine would continue to defend themselves, and in fact, economic sanctions, oil price, of course, it's now at 60. It is minimum, I guess, what the United States can afford. For Russia, it means for Russian oil costs $50 per barrel. It's already lower than it was projected in the budget. It was $70 per barrel. And now just Minister of Finance already just announced in Russia that they already estimate 55 million just overreach over a year. And they will not get approximately $35 billion inflow into the budget. But Russia spends approximately $150 billion for war, and minus 35. That's not critical, but there is a leverage.
To put it very, very simply then, because people have been confused about the minerals deal, you think that today the signing of this deal is a good day for Ukraine, a good day for the United States, and a bit of a bad day for Russia?
Absolutely, that's the case. And United States have additional leverage. That there's the draft law which presented by Senator Graham and the Senate. That's just a proposal for broader sanctions. Putin doesn't want to negotiate.
Yes. Very, very interesting. Mr. Kasyanov, thank you so much for talking to LBC tonight. President Trump addressed a crowd in the White House this afternoon for National Prayer Day, and it would seem that if anyone in Washington needs praying for right now, it's Mike Waltz, after reports he has been removed from his post as National Security Advisor. LBC's Washington correspondent Simon Marks is here, of course, to give us the latest. Simon, up to now it's been reports that Mike Waltz is about to be sacked or has been sacked. Have we got any firmer indications?
Well, there's nothing official from the White House, Andrew, but hearing your interview there with former Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Kasyanov, it reminds me of engaging in Kremlinology now to understand what's actually taking place in the White House. It is apparent that Mike Waltz is being ousted along with his deputy Alex Wong. That is a direct consequence of the scandal that saw the respected journalist Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic inadvertently added to a Signal messaging group chat in which Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, revealed classified information about the plans to attack Houthi rebels in Yemen. It was Mike Waltz who made the initial connection with Jeffrey Goldberg on Signal.
So
and it was notable yesterday. Yeah, and it was notable yesterday that when Donald Trump held that positively North Korean cabinet meeting, that Pete Hegseth was sitting right next to him. And that was a clear symbol that Trump is standing by Hegseth, but Waltz was all the way down the end of the room at the end of the table. Like everybody else, he heaped praise on the president. So that was one indication. And then in that event at the White House within the last couple of hours, the prayer meeting, Donald Trump name-checked every single member of his cabinet except for Mike Waltz. We didn't hear a word about him, and I think that may be the clearest indication yet that Waltz is out.
I noticed that, and picking up your comparison with Kremlinology back in the old USSR days, Mike Waltz was a relative moderate in the administration, was he not, when it comes to things like Ukraine? So perhaps before people celebrate too far, it might be the removal of one of the relatively rare voices of caution and moderation around the table.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Mike Waltz, of course, was a serving Republican member of the House of Representatives. He was elected from Florida's 6th congressional district. He'd taken a keen interest in international affairs. And even though he had pledged fealty, like everyone else in the government, to Donald Trump's Make America Great Again movement, I mean, there was respect for him in foreign policy circles here when he came to Washington to head up the National Security Council. But it has turned into a disaster for him, not only because of Signalgate, the messaging chat scandal, but also because one of Donald Trump's far-right supporters, a far-right influencer by the name of Laura Loomer, arrived here in Washington earlier, back at the beginning of April, got an audience with Donald Trump, to which Mike Waltz was invited, and she presented Donald Trump with a dossier reportedly detailing disloyalty to him among several National Security Council staffers, and within hours, Trump had purged 6 of them over Mike Waltz's objections. So there were multiple strikes against him from the Make America Great Again faithful, and that, I think, is ultimately why he's leaving.
So we've got that. We've got Susie Wiles, the Chief of Staff, apparently beginning to push out Elon Musk. Big changes in the court of King Donald. Thank you very, very much indeed for that, Simon. Much appreciated, as it always is. The police officer who was cleared of shooting dead Chris Cabba could still face the sack, a move that's been slammed by a former firearms officer who was there on the night. I'm going to be talking to LBC's crime correspondent to get the latest. But the time now, 6:30, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
Donald Trump's national security advisors reportedly leaving his post just 100 days into the president's term in office. It's understood Mike Waltz will depart along with his deputy, Alex Wong. A former Russian Prime Minister has told LBC Moscow doesn't know how to react to a minerals deal between the US and Ukraine. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, Mikhail Kasyanov says he thinks the Kremlin may be confused and won't want to upset Donald Trump. And Harrods has become the latest high-profile retailer to reveal it is the victim of a cyber attack. The luxury department store says it has restricted internet access across its sites as a precautionary measure. LBC weather, a cool night in the north with some isolated showers in the far northwest, largely dry in southern areas, a low of 4 degrees.
Today, ballot boxes are open across the country as voters have their say. Could the political landscape be about to shift? From 10 p.m, join me, Ben Kentish, for live election night coverage with Natasha Clark guiding you through the key moments, the early results, and what it all means for the big parties.
We'll have live reaction from all the major parties, expert analysis, and hearing from you as the story of the night unfolds.
Don't miss a moment. Join me, Ben Kentish, from 10 p.m.
Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC. This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 6060 973.
6:33. What all historians hope when they come up with an idea for a book is that it'll catch the mood of the times. And I think Shaun Walker, who works for The Guardian, has pulled it off, with the help, it has to be said, of Vladimir Putin. In The Illegals, Russia's most audacious spies and the plot to infiltrate the West, he gives us a history of deep, undercover Russian infiltration going back to the 1920s. I don't think I have to explain to you why this is still perhaps at least a little bit relevant. Anyway, I spoke with Shaun a little bit earlier about the extraordinary tales he tells in the book. Shaun, this is an absolutely fascinating book. You start off with one Vladimir Lenin scuttling into London well ahead of the revolution. But the first really big story in your book is of an enormously romantic, larger-than-life, very, very colourful individual, one of the absolute star spies, and I guess somebody that Vladimir Putin probably looks up to every night.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he's regarded as probably the greatest of the so-called great illegals who were operating in the 1920s and 30s. He was a guy called Dmitry Bistrolyotov, but he went in many different covers over the years. He was an English lord. He was a Norwegian herring salesman. He was a Yugoslav butcher. But the one identity that he used the most was that of a Hungarian count called József Perely. And in this identity, he came to London quite a lot in the early 1930s, and he handled an alcoholic Foreign Office official called Ernest Oldham. And, it was really sort of the full spy novel package. He was sleeping with Oldham's wife. He was blackmailing Oldham and basically walking out with suitcases full of Foreign Office documents and sending them back to Moscow.
Let's talk a little bit about the core of the Cold War as we understand it, what's going on in the 50s and 60s and 70s. A lot of people will be familiar with the TV program The Americans, about two Russians living as Americans undercover in the US, and will have thought it's a very, very good fiction. But it wasn't a fiction at all, was it? Just tell us a little bit about how Russians were prepared to go deep into the West and re-emerge as Irish citizens or Canadians or even Americans.
Yeah, that's right. Well, when the Cold War starts in the 50s, they want to continue this illegals program that was so successful, but they don't have people like Dmitry anymore who already have traveled all over the world and speak many languages. So they exactly have to find young, talented Soviet citizens who've never traveled, take them out of university and put them through this extraordinary training program, which by the time you get to the 60s, 70s, it lasts sort of 4 or 5 years. It's all tailored, bespoke, one-on-one. It's done in a series of safe houses in Moscow, usually, sometimes in other Soviet cities. And the idea is that, you have a combination of incredibly intense language training. Then you'd also have cultural and etiquette training. So if your cover identity is going to be of an Austrian, you will sit there and you'll read all of the school textbooks for Austrians for, the whole school period. So you pick up all of this cultural knowledge. And of course, one thing that when I was researching and talking to people who'd been through these training programs, what I kind of realized is, of course, it takes many years to convincingly train somebody to be a foreigner, but it was almost a bit like a cult induction, because the Soviet Union is sending these people abroad. They're training them to be these brilliant, slippery mavericks who can lie to everyone around them and sometimes even their own children. But at the same time, they need to make sure that they remain totally loyal to Moscow. They don't go off and spill the secrets. They don't defect. They don't see the West and decide, actually, it's rather good here, which does happen to some of them. So at the same time as giving them this training, there's also a kind of really almost an attempt to psychologically break them and make them realize that, they always have to stay loyal.
And there's a wonderful moment in the book just on how they prepare for the world outside. I was fascinated to read that the old British currency system, pounds, shillings and pence, was a particular problem for the Russians to get their heads around, never mind how you behave in pubs. But there's a wonderful moment when you actually track down one of the great illegals who's gone back to Moscow and who eventually agrees to see you. Just tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I spoke to a few different illegals, actually, for the book. So there's one, Yuri Linov, who was active in the 60s and 70s. He's now in his 80s. And just as an example of the kind of lengths that the Soviets would go to prepare people for their cover. He was an Austrian, was his cover, but at some point they decided they wanted him to work in Israel. So they made him a Jewish Austrian. They gave him a Jewish grandmother. He would keep the same identity, but he'd go to Israel wanting to, rediscover his supposedly Jewish roots.
And they circumcised him as well.
Yeah, indeed. Yes. Yeah. So there were many stories of people having to abandon their kids, people having to give up everything, really. But that really stuck in my mind as an extraordinary sacrifice to make for your cover.
And indeed, let's come right on to the present day, because this really feels like it's no longer a nostalgic book, or no longer simply a history book, because we know that the Russians are trying very, very hard to gain all sorts of information about what's going on here at the moment. Of course, it's different that we live in the world of the internet. What is the current equivalent to the illegals going on now?
Well, there's all kinds of things going on. Of course, there is all of that cyber stuff. And, in many ways, things like the US election influence. You had all Russians posing as Westerners on Facebook and organizing protests in the US. And, in some ways that uses the same concept. But, of course, it's much easier to create a fake American with a Facebook profile. You could do it in 10 minutes. But amazingly, we still do have the same kinds of illegals. And, as I was researching this book over the century, there were many times where you feel like, okay, this was great before, but like, surely this is the end of the program. And then it keeps coming back. And I mean, since the start of the war in Ukraine last 3 years, we've had 6 or 7 of these illegals who've been apprehended. An Argentinian gallery owner, for example, in Slovenia, who turned out to be an illegal, was sent back to Moscow last August in a spy exchange. And, you know, her kids only found out that both of their parents were Russian and not Argentinian on the plane back to Moscow, and then descended the steps of the airport of the plane, and there was Vladimir Putin waiting for them. So yeah, that's probably.
Well, it goes on. It's a fascinating book, Shaun. I hope you send Vladimir Putin a copy. Many thanks for joining LBC.
Thanks for having me.
Gripping stuff. Now, yesterday we reported on the news that the police officer who shot and killed Chris Kaba in London in 2022 is facing gross misconduct proceedings from the Independent Office for Police Conduct, despite being cleared of murder in court. Now, there's been a lot of reaction to the news, including a former colleague of the police officer, Martin Blake, who spoke exclusively to our crime correspondent, Andy Hughes. Andy, tell us more.
Yeah, so yesterday after the announcement, I spoke to several firearms officers, and they're basically all saying the same thing. They are not happy at all with this latest development. They're saying it's a massive, massive slap in the face for them after the acquittal last year. So, but one of the officers agreed to go on record, and that's very rare. You very rarely hear from a firearms officer at all, but one to go on record, and one at the very heart of this. So I asked him to take us back to that fateful night.
Martin did something which is absolutely tragic. I'll rejoice in no person losing their life whatsoever. It was an unpalatable thing that we witnessed in Streatham on that night in September 2022. However, it was, although tragic, it was a case of Martin acting in accordance with his training and doing his job to protect himself, his colleagues, and members of the public more generally. And that tends to get lost in the conversation, I fear.
So there you go. Martin Blake was doing his job, and that's exactly what the jury agreed with. And why does this matter? This matters because there are already fewer firearms officers on the streets, and that's because of what happened to NX 121. And there's real fears that this decision could lead to more officers leaving, and there's already a recruitment crisis. Why would a firearms officer want to join the Met in firearms?
Given all of this, I completely get that. Can you explain why the disciplinary body has taken this action? Because, I mean, if it went through a court and the court said, no, that he was following orders, he was doing the right thing, why does the body intervene again?
Well, that's the big question. It's the question no one has the answer to other than the IOPC. No one can really make any sense of this decision. Certainly, police officers themselves can't. I'm struggling to myself. All they've said is that there's been an excessive use of force. That's all they're really saying, and that they're saying that he's going to face a misconduct hearing.
And so I remember at the time of the original trial coming out, there was a genuine thought there would be an en masse walkout by firearms officers, and the army would have to be brought in to replace them. Are we facing something similar possibly ahead?
Well, do you know what? I don't get the sense of that at the moment. But what I think is definitely happening is individually, all these officers are going back to their families and they're asking them, is this really worth it? A, if I'm going to be put in front of a murder jury, and B, even if I get past that, am I going to lose my job?
Any sense at all, any chance at all of the IOPC changing their mind, or is this now a done deal? It's going to go ahead?
This is happening. This is happening.
So very, very good. Anyway, fascinating. And your first day on the job, you brought in a wonderful exclusive for LBC, Andy. So thank you very much indeed for that. Now, coming up, there have been moments in the last few years when it's felt as though we're living in an unprecedented era of political scandal. But rest assured, it is nothing new. I'm going to be talking to Robert Harris about one of the most controversial political affairs of Edwardian Britain. The time now, 6:45.
Coming up at 7, Ian Dale leading Britain's conversation. Next on LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
You may remember that thing I said about writers catching a moment. Well, obviously, Robert Harris's book, Conclave, about the papal manoeuvrings to vote for a new pope, did that. But I'm more interested in the new Robert Harris book, Precipice. Because today, people are voting all across England in local and other elections. We're not allowed, because of the broadcasting rules, to talk Westminster politics. But we can now break that very happily, because the Westminster politics I want to talk about happened between 1914 and 1915. And the heart of Robert's book is an entirely true story about how the Prime Minister, Herbert Henry Asquith, was conducting a completely reckless affair with a woman less than half his age, the aristocrat Venetia Stanley, spilling some of the most important secrets held by Britain in the run-up to and during the early stages of the First World War. In some ways, the Edwardian London Robert Harris paints is a world away from today. In other ways, it's remarkably recognisable. And Robert Harris joins me now. Great to have you on the show, Robert. Can you just start by explaining to people the true story on which Precipice is based? We've got the last Liberal Prime Minister in British political history, Asquith.
Yes, he's a largely forgotten figure these days, but Asquith was a really dominant prime minister, came to power in 1908 and was in charge of the country in 1914 when we drifted or collapsed into war. He was probably the cleverest man academically, intellectually, who's ever been prime minister. He had a penchant for drink. He was known as Squiffy, and he had a penchant for young women as well. Although the only one I think that really became serious was this woman, Venetia Stanley, the daughter of a peer, a Liberal peer, who he knew the family, and they became incredibly close. And he used to write to her. There were 12 posts delivers a day in London in 1914 and 15, can you believe it? And he just wrote to her constantly. She kept 560 letters that he wrote to her, mostly in this 18 months, and she must have written 300 to him, but he burnt them all. So I thought for the novel, I'll invent her replies.
Well, you did a very, very good job of it, Robert. So this is a story which you could have caricatured as sort of dirty old man going after a young woman. It's all a bit sleazy. But you make Asquith a very attractive figure in many ways, a sentimental and romantic man. And you say at the end of the book that you think Venetia Stanley, who's again largely forgotten these days, was one of the most consequential women in British political history.
Yes. Well, on the first point, of course, it would be quite easy to write this as a kind of Me Too era novel about a predatory, older, powerful man pursuing a younger woman. I don't think that's quite right. She gave as good as she got. She was pretty formidable, wealthy, well-connected. She got, I think, quite a lot out of the affair. It amused her to know so much. And I don't think Asquith was a bad man. He was rather a kind-hearted man. The interest in it really is, as you say, that she was immensely consequential. He didn't just write to her to show off, send her secret documents, tell her what was happening in the cabinet. He genuinely, I think, relied on her judgment. It's lonely being a prime minister, hard to find anyone to trust. He didn't get on with his wife particularly. I think in Venetia, he found someone he could confide in. She was very clever, very political. And eventually it just became too much for her. She broke off the affair with him, told him she was marrying one of his closest friends. He went to pieces and ended up folding the Liberal government, inviting the Tories in, and there was never a Liberal government again. And he said to her quite explicitly, I might not have done that if I'd still been in touch with you.
Well, that makes her very consequential. I said earlier on that there's aspects of this world which are very unfamiliar. And there's a remarkable moment in the book when Asquith takes, Venetia, his young mistress, for a walk in Hampstead Heath. And you think that's absolutely mad to do. But this is just before photojournalism. It's just before a lot of film in cinemas, news film. And most people didn't know what the Prime Minister looked like. They'd have had no idea who it was.
No, he was able to walk the streets quite freely without being harassed. That only started to change a little bit after the declaration of war, because there were so many hundreds and thousands of people hanging around Westminster, agog for news. Then he found himself, to his horror, sometimes being recognised, and he would walk back from the Commons to Downing Street and found himself being pursued. But in the novel, I recount how he went up to visit her in October 1914, when the Western Front was still in balance. And he disappeared for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights from Downing Street, went without a bodyguard, without a secretary, caught a train up to Crewe, changed to a local branch line, and visited her and her family's grand stately home in Cheshire. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal. That you could be able to do such a thing.
It's unthinkable in a way, but I suppose one of the other ways in which this world is different from ours is that Asquith and most of his cabinet and the Stanleys are part of a tiny little aristocratic or very, very posh world of bridge parties in Mayfair and, shuffling between each other's houses in Rolls Royces. It's a very, very tiny world, the top of British politics.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't know how, only a few thousand people were members of this society. And it wasn't only the Liberals, the Conservatives as well. And quite often they even mingled. I mean, there was friendships between the party leaders and high and senior politicians. And it was a very closed world. Nobody blabbed to the press. It would be unthinkable now a Prime Minister could get away with this, because his colleagues became aware of what Asquith was doing. He used to write to her in the middle of cabinet meetings. It's quite extraordinary. A crucial moment is where he is writing to her in the middle of the cabinet or the War Council meeting, which agreed the Dardanelles disastrous expedition. And he completely took his eye off the ball. People saw this, but no one blabbed about it. Although I think if it had gone on much longer, it could well have become a huge scandal, which is why she decided to end it. Precipice is kind of like a double-edged title, both about Britain plunging over the cliff into the First World War, but also their affair was on the edge of disaster
all the time. Yes, yeah. Well, there's plausible bits in the book, and there's less plausible bits in the book. And the less plausible bits in the book are the letters written by the Prime Minister to Venetia Stanley. And the news is they're all exactly true, because you dug these letters up. I mean, they've been published, but I think you spent a lot of time working through huge mounds of them. Just tell people listening a little bit about the true story of the letters.
Well,
I don't know. Can you hear?
Wooden box in her bedroom. Yes, can you hear me?
You're back again, Robert. Yes, the letters start in a painted wooden box in her bedroom.
Yes, I'm sorry if I disappeared. Yeah, she kept the letters in a painted wooden box in her bedroom, and for them back, which she could have done. And she kept them. These included, and I've seen them, they're in the Bodleian Library now in Oxford, they include top secret letters from Lord Kitchener, Sir John French, the commander of the British forces in France. I mean, military details of armaments production, intelligence estimates, quite extraordinary. And she kept them. He never asked for them back, which makes me feel in some way that he half wanted the world to know that he was this romantic and that this was a kind of diary of his time. And it is the most extraordinary account of a Prime Minister's life. She kept them. She died in 1948, about 20 years after he died. Her daughter found them when she was clearing her effects. She showed them to her friend, Mark Bonham Carter, who was Asquith's grandson, who worked for the Collins publishers. He had a transcript made. He gave it to his friend Roy Jenkins, later obviously leader of the SDP, but at that time a Labour MP, writing political biography, and he used them in a very, very bowdlerised form in a biography that he wrote of Asquith. And in a way, they have been carefully managed in the way that they've been introduced to the public. And the startling importance of her and this affair have been played down, I think, by historians ever since.
I mentioned that there are aspects of this story which are remarkably contemporary. And it's not just the fact there's a huge sex scandal at the heart of government I was talking about. It's those letters and the General Post Office itself. Because you say 12 different deliveries every single day. They really had WhatsApp, but it was just called the GPO.
Yes, WhatsApp, and of course it didn't disappear. That's the other thing. And you wrote quite long letters. Some of Asquith's letters went round to about 2,000 or 3,000 words. I mean, they're absolutely enormous and beautiful and rather moving. One of them I remember ends, "Do you know how much I love you? Just multiply the stars by the sands." And he was completely besotted with her. And when he thought she was going to break off the affair, he threatened suicide, talked of it. An amazing thing for a prime minister leading a country at war to be this caught up with an utterly, crazy romance with a woman who's only 27. He was 62. I mean, it's bizarre.
Robert, right at the beginning, I mentioned Conclave. You have a very good touch for the spirit of the times, and this new book certainly reaches that. Do you have another story on your desk at the moment? Anything like this at all?
I'm thinking of going back to do another novel set in ancient Rome, follow up to the novels I wrote about Cicero. I just think it's impossible to find some way of writing about what's going on in America, I think, by taking it head on, but maybe by trying to talk about another republic that went over the edge of a cliff and fell prey to strong men. That might be the way through.
It's been said to me that Trump is the Caesar figure. He is the moment when the republic collapses into an empire.
I think that's right. I think there's much to be said for it. And Caesar's successor, Augustus Caesar, he kept the facade of a democracy. There were still elections, there was still a Senate, the magistrates and so on. But really all the power resided behind the scenes with the man who controlled the money and the army. And one feels one's moving into a different kind of democracy now.
I'll leave you to get back to the writing. It sounds kind of urgent. Robert Harris, thank you very much indeed. Now then, if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download now for free from the App Store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish and Natasha Clark with their overnight election special. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. That word proud, it's an odd one, isn't it? What makes us feel proud? And why do we feel proud of some things and not others? The Mayor of London, Sir Sadiq Khan, has been talking today about how he's proud of being English, proud of being a Londoner, proud of being a Muslim, proud of his Pakistani and Asian heritage. What part of your own identity are you most proud of? At 8, Simon Marks joins us for another Question Marks, your chance